17 killed and dozens more wounded as Ukraine fails to down Russian missiles launched at Kyiv. And to discuss the latest from Ukraine, we're joined by MacKay, former lecturer at the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Good evening.
Good evening.
So deliveries of defense missiles to Ukraine have dropped threefold compared to 2025, says President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, this announcement comes after yet another Russian strike, which ended in no enemy missiles intercepted by Ukraine. So what position is Ukraine in, especially after Kyiv learned that most likely the US will not grant it a license to produce Patriot interceptors?
Yes, well, even if the U.S. did grant a license, it would be a while before Ukraine would be able to produce them. But this is extremely discouraging because Ukraine was in talks with representatives of Raytheon, the manufacturer of PAC-3 interceptors used by Patriot anti-ballistic missile systems. And President Trump gave a full stop to that, refuses to allow Patriot missiles to be purchased under the Pearl program, in other words, paid for by Europeans, and refuses to provide them to Ukrainian defenders. European allies, for their part, have no initiatives to support Ukraine in this regard. Ukraine has an initiative called Freya, and they seem to be pretty much begging European allies to come along with this Freya anti-ballistic missile defense.
Precisely,
shield.
President Zelensky calls for more interceptors, but who's there to answer? I mean, who can afford, to give the PAC-3 interceptors to Ukraine?
Anyone who has them, because it's clear that European countries will not use them because they will not themselves fight the Russian invaders. The only defense of Europe is the armed forces of Ukraine. And it's because of that the Russian terrorist state is targeting Ukrainian civilians, because they know that only the will of Ukrainians really stands in their way. It's certainly not European leadership outside Ukraine. So who can afford it? The answer is every country. The wealth of the European Union is vastly greater than that of the Russian terrorist state, but they refuse to devote it even to defend themselves.
Ukraine will never join NATO, says former Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny, suggesting that it may be wiser for Kyiv to look for closer ties with buddies like Jeff, the Joint Expeditionary Force. So is Zaluzhny expressing his own opinion here, or is Ukraine abandoning one of the the priorities of its foreign policy?
I think if you read Mr. Zaluzhny's his comments carefully, what he's talking about is the state of NATO armies now is prepared to either win World War II or win a pre-1991 battle with the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist, but completely unprepared to fight the actual enemy, which is the Russian terrorist state invading Europe. So, and we look over the past several months in war games, and we see that Ukrainian participants, the armed forces of Ukraine, have won these scenarios over and over and over again, sinking NATO fleets on paper or on the computer. And because of their use of drones, they're completely different combat doctrine. So the comments made about Ukraine never joining NATO is showing itself to be yesterday's alliance, to be specific, a pre-1991 alliance. And Ukraine has moved beyond it in many ways because it's had to.
Well, Ukraine may have a new war doctrine, it may have its drones, but it's lacking soldiers. And Czechia lifts protection for draft-age Ukrainians, while Poland, on the other hand, has no plans to do so. So what do you make of it, given the fact that Kyiv is struggling with military personnel shortages?
I think this is not as big a concern as is made out to be, because Russia is fighting a war of attrition, which is one that we've seen from the First World War, attrition of personnel, throwing suicide assaults of soldiers at defended positions. But Ukraine is fighting a war of attrition with technology. They use drones as a disposable commodity. They're creating a kill zone, 20, now 40 kilometers, medium-range drones up to 200 kilometers. So the
in your opinion, can they stop the invasion with the number of soldiers they have at their disposal at the moment?
Yes, because they are stopping it. Russia is incapable of combined armed operations. They're incapable of armored assaults. They attempted one last week. And Ukraine destroyed over 20 tanks that Russia had deployed for the first time in half a year in such numbers. So the answer is yes, Ukraine can definitely stop Russian offensives, and they are doing it.
Now, what do you think of Rustem Umerov's new position, the politician who has been involved in a major corruption scandal, is now the head of Foreign Intelligence Service. So could this lead to yet another wave of protests, I'm wondering, just like it happened after the dismissal of the hugely popular former defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov?
I think so, and this would be a good thing. Ukrainian civil society has always been very strong, and despite the fact that Ukraine is not able to hold elections because of the Russian invasion, and that democracy in the form of civil society, in the form of these street protests, is very strong. And we've seen that President Zelensky, at least in part, listened to them when he fired General Syrskyi and hired a new commander-in-chief who was from the new generation, who had actually served in the liberation of Mariupol in 2014. So I think, will this lead to more protests? I think yes, and it's a good thing for a democracy.
Well, we've started with drones. I mean, not drones, the interceptors for Ukraine. Now, Poland wants to become one of the production sites of Patriot interceptors. Do you think that Warsaw would be more likely to receive such a license from the US than Ukraine?
I think so, only because there will be pressure from Raytheon and other US defense manufacturers to force Trump to say yes. However, I see the Americans are committed to a go slow approach. So I don't see licensing being granted for a very long time. Certainly, Trump believes it's necessary to give as much headwind to Russian ballistic missile attacks as possible by delaying and blocking everything he possibly can. And that would include licenses to Poland or any country other than Ukraine.
And what do you make of an armed drone found by the Germans in the vicinity of a Ukrainian plane in Leipzig today?
Yeah, it shows how easy it is for Russia's war on Europe to take place, and that Germany and other countries are not taking seriously that they are, in fact, at war. So I keep hoping that there will be a shift in thinking, that there will be a recognition that this is not sabotage, this is an act of war. It's not an accident, it's an act of war. And a shift in thinking. But I've been disappointed for over 12 years, so I think this will be swept under the rug.
MacKay, former lecturer in the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, who was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.